Okay guys, this video is going to be focused on the applied anatomy of the chest muscles, the pectoralis major, again referring back to our anatomy content, okay? So in this lecture, or this video rather, what I'd like to do is basically give you the tools to be able to teach your clients to feel their pecs working a little bit more on exercises that they're doing, okay? This is something that people do struggle with, to be fair. It's something that comes up quite a bit, even among individuals who have been training for quite a while. You might know people, or this might include you, this may have been you in the past. You know, people who have been bench pressing for years, or they've been doing lots of chest exercises, but they never really feel their chest work. They feel like their shoulders and their arms take over, and that may even be reflected in terms of their own physique development. Maybe they've got great shoulders, they've got great arms, but their chest really never lived up to that level of development, okay? So in this video, what I'd like you to leave with is an idea of what length the pec is going to be in different positions, for example. That might give you exercise ideas, such as trying to move into the lengthen range a little bit more, getting someone to work in a stretch position, getting someone to work in a more shortened, contracted position, and generally just getting people to be able to feel the chest working a little bit more in those positions, and also in common exercises like the bench press, for example. You know, if someone is pressing away, they're doing the exercise as they always have done, but they're not feeling their chest working very much. You know, is there something we can do to try to get more of an internal focus there, okay? The mind to muscle connection and, you know, feeling a muscle work, it's not the be all end all. You know, you're still getting benefits from the exercise regardless of whether or not you focus on that. Some people will get great development from never focusing on that, but in cases where someone is saying, you know, I've never really felt my chest work, I don't know what it feels like to engage my chest never gets sore, it hasn't developed well, they're the cases where I would think about intervening and try to, you know, get that person to be able to focus a little bit more on the muscle that we're trying to work, okay? So first things first, just kind of giving you an idea of the anatomy in practice. Like if we think about the anatomy that we discussed, we said that the pectoralis major basically has 2 or maybe 3 components, okay? So you've got your costal head, or your abdominal costal head, you could say. So that's basically going to be the part of the pec that's lowest down. So you basically got the attachments around the costal cartilages, okay? So you've got attachments down here that are quite low, and people will refer to that as the lower pec typically, okay? So I refer to it as just the costal portion, or the abdominal costal portion, if you will. But then you've got kind of one big muscle really is what we're talking about, and that's the sternocostal head, or simply the sternal head in some cases, okay? So people will refer to that as basically just the lower pec and then the upper pec. You can kind of divide it a little bit further into, as I said, the abdominal costal, the sternal, or altogether the sternocostal, and then finally the clavicular head, which is the upper pec. So you can say upper pec, mid pec, lower pec, and they're going to have their own individual lines of pull. And again, that comes back to their attachment points, the origin of the upper pec, clavicular head. We said the origin is going to be on the clavicle, okay? So naturally, if you think about the anatomy there, if we've got fibers running from the clavicle that are inserting down into the upper part of the humerus, they've kind of got a downward direction here. So they're inserting from a downward direction, and as a result they're kind of going to have a little bit more of a flexion component to their function, and we discussed that in the lecture. However, when we talk about the other muscles, there are other portions of the muscle, they're going to have slightly different lines of pull. So if you've got something that's attaching from the sternum, it's kind of coming straight across. So as a result, the movement of the mid pec, or the sternal part of the pec, is going to be more so straight across the body. And then finally we've got this costal or abdominal costal portion, the lower pec, which is going to pull the arm down more so. So it's all related to the convergent shape of the pec. So we've got all these origin points that come down to a single insertion point. So it's a convergent fan-shaped muscle, and as a result there's different lines of pull within the muscle and one kind of single output when the whole muscle is working together. So that's the important thing to get, is that in the vast majority of cases, you know, all these fibers are going to be working together. There's just going to be a little bit of a bias towards some over others, depending on the specific direction in which we are moving and the direction from which the force is acting as well, okay? So with that said, I want to take that anatomy now and get you to think about where would the lengthened position of the pec be? Okay, so if we wanted to lengthen the pec maximally, what would that look like? You might think, okay, probably the bottom of a bench press. You know, if we come down to the bottom, is that the fully lengthened position of the pec? And in some respects, yes. In some respects, that is pushing the pec into a lengthened position. What it's doing is it's taking the insertion point and it's pulling it away from the origin. However, it's not really pulling it away from the lower pec fibers quite as much. Okay, so they could be lengthened a little bit more. So if they're kind of attaching here, then if I pull his arm back this way, I'm going to be lengthening those more. So as a result, the lengthened portion of the pec is going to vary a little bit depending on which fibers you're trying to lengthen, and you don't need to think about this in that much detail when you're prescribing exercises, but it's just worth thinking about what the anatomy looks like in practice. So in general, if you're trying to lengthen the pec and say how would I get the deepest stretch, it's going to be kind of in this type of position where Paddy's arm is almost slightly overhead. So his arm is now in an externally rotated position. So if you look at this arm, it's not going to be in the standard position that you'd be in if you're in a bench press. It's almost back a little bit. Okay, so he's got external rotation. His shoulders moving into horizontal extension or horizontal abduction, so moving directly out to the side, but it's also flexed a little bit. So there's a little bit of flexion going on there as well. And as a result, we're taking all those fibers and we're lengthening them. And most of the pec fibers are going to feel like they're stretching at that point. And you can even feel that. If you feel the muscle, you're going to feel that it's stretched out at that position of a repetition. So an example of an exercise that could involve that position would be some type of fly variation, for example. You could do a dumbbell fly in this position. We sometimes prescribe this to clients where they're taking a fly exercise and they bring it all the way back into a deep stretch position. The amount of movement that you have available there, you can relax down for a second. The amount of movement you're going to have available there is going to depend on what you're using. So if you're using a bench, this can kind of restrict the movement of the scapula a little bit. And if the scapula can't retract properly, if you're not retracting there, then you're not going to be able to get down as far. So we can actually demonstrate that, for example. If you let your shoulders round forward there, and I pull this back, it's going to be hard for me to get that shoulder back into any further in that range of motion. But if you pinch your shoulders back now, I can pull that further. Okay, so what we've done there is we've taken that pec and we've enabled ourselves to open up a little bit more without as much restriction there at the shoulder. So that's just something that's worth considering. In addition, this is what we would refer to typically as a close packed position of the shoulder joint. That's what people would refer to it as. And that basically just means that the structures within the shoulder, for example, the ligaments and the joint capsule, they're going to be in a position in which they're quite tight in that position. So you're going to feel that there's restriction there if you go to the extreme of that movement, more than just the muscular contributions. Okay, so that is something that's worth bearing in mind. Some people find that that's an uncomfortable position for them. So the reason I'm kind of bringing that into the conversation is to suggest that you don't necessarily need to take a muscle into its fully lengthened position, because the lengthened position of a muscle does not act in a vacuum. It also depends on the joint structures and other muscles that are in that area. Okay, so all of that needs to be considered when it comes to actual exercise prescription. But that gives you an idea of what the anatomy, in terms of taking the muscle, lengthening it, what it looks like in practice. Importantly then, coming back to the conversation of getting someone to be able to actually feel their pecs working a little bit more during exercise, the shortened position can be your friend here, okay? Because generally, if you're trying to evoke a sensation of muscle contracting intensely, you want to take the muscle into its most shortened position. That's the position in which the sensation is going to be most intense, okay? So what position that is going to be bringing the arm across the body. Okay, again, the specific fibers that feel most shortened are going to vary. If Paddy brings his arm across down here, he's going to feel like all the pec is bunching up in the lower portion. If he brings it straight across, it's going to feel like the pec is bunching up in the mid portion. And if he kind of brings his arm across to his opposite ear, he's going to feel like the clavicular head or the upper pec is bunching up a little bit more. So from my angle, what that looks like, if you were doing like a cable fly, it would be a low cable fly. You're going to feel the lower pec a little bit more. A mid cable fly, you're going to feel the mid pec a bit more, and then a high cable fly where I'm moving towards my opposite ear, you're going to feel that upper pec bunching up a little bit more. So if your client was unable to, you know, they're not getting that sensation, sometimes you might see that when people are doing flying exercises, maybe they're moving their shoulders a lot, or they're trying to use their biceps to kind of move the weight. What I might get someone to do is, okay, if you just put your hands together for me, Paddy, and I just want you to apply light pressure in there. Simple, okay? All we're doing there is getting Paddy to just feel what it feels like to just hold that position, keep that intent in that direction. And what I want you to do there is actually pinch the shoulder blades back if you can, just a touch. People won't be able to pinch their shoulder blades back all the way when they have their hands together because you're kind of restricted. But by pinching those shoulder blades back, by keeping the arms more or less straight, someone will start to feel their chest muscles working a little bit more. And if they don't feel it initially, I'd have them hold it for 30 seconds, ask them where they're feeling fatigue, and generally you'll start to feel that those chest muscles getting involved a little bit more. And then from there, what I might do is actually get them to apply that in a real life exercise context. So if someone's able to do it with just their hands, then I would say, okay, maybe we could do that with a bar. So for example, if someone's doing a bench press and they're always feeling their shoulders work, never feeling their chest work, then rather than just thinking of this exercise as being up, down, because that's generally your intent, that you're just trying to push the bar off you, what I'm going to get the person to do is try and apply intent in this way, okay? So obviously your hands aren't going to slide in and out, that's not what we're looking for, but I want Paddy to think about driving his hands in. So he's trying to drive them in towards the center as if when he's holding that bar, he's trying to get into that position again. And that intent adds another force of friction in the exercise that's going to lead to an intense contraction in the chest that wouldn't otherwise be there. As a coach, you can also add in the element of just assisting the person with feeling that. So I just want you to push in against my hands at every portion in the rep. So rather than it just being up and down, we're now adding the element of having to actively push in against my hands at all portions in the rep, including the top. So at the top position of a bench press, he can rest there because the load's basically just down through his joint. It's not a big deal. His chest can just be completely relaxed. However, if I go like that, his chest immediately has to activate. So relax again, and if I push, he has to activate, okay? He has to activate his chest, he has to activate his triceps to keep that weight in place, okay? So that's something you can do, that you can try to help people to get a grasp of. So they're just some practical tips to help people to, you know, feel their chest a little bit more. You can also do this with push-ups. For example, if someone's doing push-ups, you can have them think about actively driving their hands together. It's not the act of actually moving them, it's the act of having the intent. And the way that that works is that if you hold the bar up again for me, Paddy, this is basic physics, basic exercise mechanics, okay? So, you know, if you think back to those laws you would have learned, Newton's laws, once upon a time in science. I think you do them in junior cert science for those of you in Ireland, but you do them anyway. The idea, the simplest law to remember is that every action has an equal and opposite reaction. And the reason that's actually important, again, it's not just to nerdify resistance training, but because if Paddy pushes in that way, okay, if he's trying to slide his hand that way and it's not moving, there has to be something going in the opposite direction, and that's the force of friction. So friction is operating in the opposite direction for him to be able to maintain that position. So whatever force he applies that way, he's getting back in friction, or vice versa. So the result then is that there's an additional challenge. So if we were to think about what weight is on the bar, that actually doesn't encompass all the challenge that's being experienced, because there's actually also this force of friction that's being added. So he would be performing different load on the chest if he was to have that intent or not have that intent. So again, that's just another example of why the weight on the bar doesn't always tell you what's going on internally, and how you can use this kind of bringing some of the science in to improve your actual art of coaching. So hopefully there's some things in there, guys, that you can take away and actually apply in practice. Again, as you can see, whole purpose of the Coach's Corner, whole purpose of what we're trying to deliver here is taking some of the science concepts, the anatomy, even a little bit of physics in there, and what we're saying is this is what matters actually on the gym floor, okay? So it's not about just trying to explore all theory for the sake of theory, but rather to give you the foundation where you know where the pec inserts, you know where the pec from where it originates, you know what the pec looks like, and as a result, you can basically derive its functions from that. So if you think about where does it originate, where does it insert, then you can kind of think of it logically. You know, if I had a string that started here and ended here and I shortened it, what would happen? It would pull the arm across the body. That's the whole idea here, is we want to be practical, and we want you to be able to work through from first principles, what does this muscle do, and how could I use cues, how could I use my knowledge to help someone work that muscle a little bit better. So hopefully you found that helpful, guys. We'll do this for other muscle groups as well. If you have any comments or questions, just let us know.